Imagine a world where global finance no longer orbits the US dollar, where emerging powers pool resources, challenge entrenched institutions, and forge new corridors for trade and development. Welcome to BRICS, the bloc attempting to reshape the order born in 1944 at Bretton Woods, chipping away at the petrodollar system and bluntly confronting Washington's sanctions regime. Over the next few minutes, we'll trace BRICS' journey from symbolic summits to alternative structures and ask whether it can truly deliver a new multipolar order. In July 1944, 44 nations gathered in New Hampshire to build a dollar-anchored financial framework. The US dollar was pegged to gold, and other currencies fixed to the dollar under IMF oversight, fueling decades of trade growth and underpinning globalization with American security guarantees. Alongside the IMF, the World Bank emerged to fund reconstruction and development. Over time, it became a tool of US influence. Washington steered project selection, loan conditions, and governance reforms to bind borrowers to American strategic objectives. Then in August 1971, President Nixon ended dollar-for-gold convertibility, formally breaking the Bretton Woods gold standard and ushering in a free-floating fiat system. Stripped of its hard asset anchor, the dollar faced new volatility and an urgent need to secure enduring global demand. With gold off the table, Washington turned to oil. In June 1974, it struck a landmark deal with Saudi Arabia. In exchange for security guarantees and military support, Riyadh would price its oil exclusively in dollars. That pact institutionalized the petrodollar system. Every oil importer needed dollars to buy crude, and surplus revenues were recycled into US treasuries and other dollar-denominated assets. From that point on, the dollar was effectively backed by oil rather than gold, keeping the demand for the dollar high and keeping US borrowing costs low. And the petrodollar cemented the dollar as the world's reserve currency and empowered Washington's most potent non-kinetic weapon, financial sanctions. By cutting targets off from dollar-cleared transactions and swift messaging, the US can freeze assets, choke oil revenues, and isolate states without firing a shot. Non-US aligned nations grew resentful of this lopsided order and began to envision an alternative framework that could bypass America's financial chokehold. The term BRIC first surfaced in 2001, coined by a Goldman Sachs economist to describe four fast-growing economies poised to reshape global influence. 8 years later, Brazil, Russia, India, and China convened in Yekaterinburg for their inaugural summit, marking the bloc's formal debut. South Africa joined in 2011, expanding the acronym to BRICS and adding a vital African dimension to its geopolitical footprint. That same year, the group issued a joint call for a new global reserve currency, one that would be diverse, stable, and predictable. While the statement avoided direct criticism of the dollar, it nonetheless triggered a brief dip in its value, signaling the bloc's intent to challenge the status quo. Some in the West began to view BRICS as a counterweight to the G7, while others saw it as a loosely aligned bloc, driven more by anti-Western sentiment than coherent strategy. Viewing the Bretton Woods system as overly Western and structurally biased, BRICS began constructing its own financial architecture. In March 2013 in Durban, members agreed to establish a cooperative institution that would complement, but not replicate, the IMF and World Bank. This led to the creation of the New Development Bank, designed to reflect BRICS priorities and operate free from US veto power, and a US-led global G7 NATO order. In 2014, the Fortaleza Summit saw the official launch of the New Development Bank. And to complement the New Development Bank, the Contingent Reserve Arrangement was also launched, a $100 billion liquidity pool designed to offer emergency support without the strings attached to IMF lending. Its governance structure is deliberately egalitarian, with no single member holding veto power, an intentional break from the weighted voting systems of Bretton Woods institutions. A year later, ministers initiated consultations for a BRICS payment system that could serve as an alternative to SWIFT, aiming to settle transactions in national currencies and reduce exposure to Western financial infrastructure. China's CIPS, India's SFMS, Russia's SPFS, and Brazil's PIX all aim to reduce reliance on Western financial infrastructure and offer redundancy in the event of sanctions or systemic disruption. These systems reflect the form of global financial architecture, but they answer to BRICS priorities, shielding members from Washington's economic leverage. While the new development bank was created to reduce dependence on Western-led institutions, there's a quiet irony in its operational backbone. The bulk of its lending is denominated in US dollars. True, these are largely offshore dollars, circulating outside the direct reach of Washington's financial system, but the reliance underscores a deeper challenge. Even as BRICS builds parallel architecture, the gravitational pull of the dollar remains difficult to escape. By 2023, the bloc had extended invitations to Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, though Argentina later declined. And by 2024, the new development bank had approved 96 projects totaling $32 billion, an assertive step toward financial autonomy. Through a BRICS Plus format, partner countries, Algeria, Malaysia, Turkey, Nigeria and others, engage without full membership commitments. China champions broad expansion to amplify clout. India and Brazil caution that overextension could dilute cohesion. The organizers frame expansion as a step toward a multipolar world order, leveraging global South alliances to challenge Western dominance. President Putin emphasized that BRICS isn't rejecting the dollar outright, but preparing alternatives to its weaponization. Yet internal contradictions persist. Some members seek multipolarity, others aim to dethrone the dollar, goals that don't always align. Despite its ambitions, BRICS faces persistent internal fractures and mounting external skepticism. The border disputes between India and China continue to erode trust, while the bloc's political diversity, ranging from liberal democracies to entrenched authoritarian regimes, makes consensus elusive. Economically, China's outsized contribution to BRICS reserves, now over 40%, skews influence and raises questions about balance. Banking and legal frameworks, including respect for the rule of law, remain fragmented, and member currencies lack the global liquidity needed to support a unified financial system. Critics often liken BRICS to toddlers on a playground, grand in ambition but lacking the institutional depth to follow through. Expansion efforts, while headline-grabbing, are seen by some as performative gestures rather than strategic moves. The abandoned BRICS cable project, originally designed to bypass US surveillance, became a symbol of the bloc's struggle to deliver on infrastructure promises. Even the satellite constellation agreed in 2021 remains modest, with just 6 existing satellites and a tentative proposal for a joint research station. Some now describe BRICS as a failed project, citing its inability to unite as a meaningful global force. American political scientist Joseph Nye notes its utility for diplomatically isolated members like Russia and Iran, but warns that expansion may only deepen intra-bloc rivalries. And while BRICS continues to promote alternatives to the dollar, many experts argue these efforts are unlikely to succeed, hampered by weak integration, incompatible economic models, and a fundamental lack of trust among members. The true test will be whether BRICS can transform lofty declarations into binding mechanisms that reshape global finance and chip away at dollar supremacy. And according to the Atlantic Council, BRICS' de-dollarization push in North Africa poses a real challenge to US interests, potentially undermining sanctions and deficit financing. In 2024, President Trump threatened a 100% tariff on countries pursuing a BRICS currency, an explicit deterrent to de-dollarization. In 2025, Indonesia is set to become the 11th full member. This will further expand BRICS' reach and reinforce its ambition to reshape global governance from the ground up. As BRICS prepares for India's 2026 presidency, watch for priorities like AI regulation, space collaboration, and people-centered development. Will BRICS emerge as a genuine alternative or remain a grand gesture? Only time and the next wave of summits will tell. This is Orbital Strategy, your vantage point on the power plays reshaping our future. Subscribe for clarity, altitude, and strategic edge.